Well, first for an update on the Israel-Hamas deal, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country is ready to resume the war against Hamas in the event that talks for a second phase of the ceasefire fail. In a televised speech just hours before it was due to start on Sunday, Netanyahu stressed that the ceasefire was temporary and Israel reserved the right to resume strikes in Gaza and had the backing of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump to do so. Netanyahu also outlined what he called the success of Israel's military campaign over the last 15 months, including the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. The ceasefire is due to come into force at 8:30 local time.
In the closely related development, the fourth edition of the Palestinian International Forum for Media and Communication is taking place in Istanbul. The gathering seeks to inform attendees on the changes happening in the war-torn Middle East region with respect to this year's theme, which is the Palestinian narrative, a new era. The timing of the conference coincides with the landmark deal which has been reached between Hamas and Israel. Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsoya reports.
Journalists and academics from around the world have gathered here in Istanbul for the Palestinian International Forum for Media and Communication. It's a two-day event, and the topic of candid conversation is Palestine.
The focus on this year's edition of this forum is to give people timely information on this new era of Palestine.
2025 marks its fourth annual edition. And on the same weekend, a historic ceasefire between Hamas and Israel is supposed to come into effect. There are no prizes for guessing the top topic of the talks.
What makes me very pessimistic is that the Western world, still to this day, they haven't imposed any sanctions, not even a threat of a sanction. And now, when the ceasefire was announced, there comes congratulations from all over countries who still haven't done anything, only talking. I'm very afraid that I think still it's probably the United States who has the key to it all.
Chatter of the coming of a second Trump presidency ricochets off the wall, landing at the feet of some optimism.
So if he wants a legacy, he can be the president who made peace in the Middle East. He can be the biggest president in all history.
In separating Africa's own decolonization.
Africa is also represented at the forum. A session on the Palestinian narrative in global media features Nigerian broadcaster Ireti Bakare Yusuf, who believes Nigeria has a responsibility to keep its people aptly informed on the happenings in the Middle East.
We still have a large proportion of Nigerian Christian Zionists, the majority of whom do not know the history. Sadly, the Nigerian media, a large proportion of them, still think this is a religious war. They still haven't bothered to read. Yet these are the people who are supposed to be educating the nation. So where do you go from there? So for me, it's important for me to make this speech, and hopefully it'll go out, to remind them, because if we Nigerians, Africans, we can't connect with the Palestinian struggle, then who exactly do we connect with? Really? What is our history all about, right? So we need to wake up. Nigeria took the forefront when it came to fighting apartheid for South Africa. Whilst, yes, our foreign policy right now is unaligned, and that's good, that's great, but we can still be that giant, we can still be that voice, we can extend our agency to the Palestinians, because everybody deserves to be free.
For Palestine, that freedom has been elusive at best, but is it now within reach?
2025 edition of the Palestinian International Forum for Media and Communication comes to an end with a session highlighting the strategic directions for Palestine's new era. Now, perhaps more than ever, is the time for focus if there is to be, at long last, peace in the Middle East. Adefemi Akinsoya, Arise News, Istanbul.
Indeed, peace in the Middle East. Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsoya joins us now from Istanbul, Turkey, for an update. Good morning, Adefemi. The package referred to Nigeria's role in the narrative around the Middle East, often led, according to the speaker in the report, with incomplete knowledge. How do you think that this event seeks to address that?
Morning, Shaitan. Thank you very much. So yes, we did hear Ireti Bakare Yusuf speak very candidly about Nigeria's role in this war when it comes to Palestine, Hamas, Israel, but in general, the Middle East at large. So essentially, one of the ways that they're seeking to redress this supposed gap is by platforming a Nigerian journalist and giving her the opportunity to share her own experiences. And with Ireti Bakare Yusuf, her case is quite unique in the sense that she is, of course, a Nigerian broadcaster who broadcasts via radio on her show to a largely Nigerian audience. And she says ever since, especially the iteration of this conflict between Hamas and Israel, starting from the 7th of October 2023, she has consistently been mentioning and talking about the Palestinian narrative to Nigerian audiences. So when it comes to trying to bridge that gap, that is one of the efforts that this forum is supporting. Now, if you also listen to what she said, she talked about how Nigeria's religious diversity plays a role in the narrative being given to Nigeria. She talks about how when we are looking at the country, it's no secret that some 30 to 40% of Nigerians belong to the Christian faith, another 30 to 40% perhaps Muslims, and then of course there are traditional religions. And she is saying that when you break these down across religious lines, there is not enough accurate information going out into the populace. And she cited on stage Pastor Adeboye, who tweeted very, very soon after the October 7, 2023 attack, his support for Israel, and talked about how peace would be restored soon, the land would be given to them, just condemning the attack, which on its face is not a bad thing because the attack was heinous, right? And he did receive adulation, he did receive praise, but he also received a lot of criticism from Muslims, people who were not Muslims, but who were definitely sympathetic to the Palestinian narrative and who had more experience understanding both sides of this very complicated conflict. And as a result, he deleted his post, but the damage, some would say, was already done. That is an example, she says, of how the Nigerian populace, people who have platforms in the country, need to be more responsible with the narrative when it comes to letting people know about what is happening in the Middle East. She says that people still feel this to be a religious war, and it is not. And perhaps that could be the reason why there is more sympathy to one side of this conflict to the other, if people believe that this is a line that you have to draw when it comes to what religious background you have. But that's not the case here. That's not the narrative that has been pushed out while we've been here. And just funnily enough, she did also mention, when we were talking, the fact that Ibrahim Babangida, who is obviously a Muslim, he actually had a very favorable relationship with Palestine, that he sponsored Palestinian students to come to Nigeria to study. And that was an example of Nigeria's positioning when it comes to foreign policy and being sympathetic to what is happening in the Middle East. And we also know that Nigeria has a great history when it comes to being on the right side of history when it comes to foreign conflicts and foreign ills happening across the world. An example of that would be Nigeria fighting alongside South Africa during apartheid. So it's an example of Nigeria's very, very important position in the world. And as this forum continues, we will hope that the purpose that was driven with this entire gathering is that more people around the world would have the access to really what is happening to the Middle East from the Palestinian narrative.
All right, Adefemi, I mean, brilliant submission there, and of course, kudos to Ireti Bakare for our insight. But let's talk about the ceasefire now, which has faced a last-minute stumbling block. Israel wants a request honored before proceeding with the truce. How has that news been received over there?
Good morning, Steve. Yes, absolutely. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that he wants the list of names of people to be released in terms of the hostages before that they can formally agree to this ceasefire, before they can actually say the war in terms of the fighting will be paused. So this is coming very, very late in the day because we're just very, very few moments away from this first stage of the ceasefire being put in to power. And so with this redress, it will be interesting to see whether or not Hamas does in fact release the the names that Israel, that Benjamin Netanyahu is requesting, we'll have to wait and see. But when it comes to how that's been received here, the people we've spoken to are coming with, unfortunately, not a lot of surprise, while they were very much anticipating the coming of this ceasefire and the pausing in fighting, especially with the Palestinian people that we've been speaking to. There's also a level of, well, this is what we've been saying this entire conference, and when it comes to this conflict, Israel has far more power than anyone else. And I do think, critically speaking, if you take a step back and look at the situation, that would be quite accurate. Israel does have the backing of very powerful allies in the world, the United States being one of them. So when we're looking at this stumbling block, it is something that can definitely come into fruition if these names are given. But then there is also the legitimate fear is that if this request is honored, what would then happen thereafter again? And how is this going to be an agreement that actually comes into fruition if there's constantly being concessions being made to one side and not the other? Steve?
All right then, Femi, but looking at that, the events are drawing to an end today. What do you think the legacy of the 4th edition of the Palestinian International Forum for Media and Communication will be?
I think it will be reach. I think it will be making sure that the information that was discussed on stage here, the information that was discussed off stage in the sideline seminars, in the conversations happening infrequently and informally, I do think it will be reached. The whole purpose of this forum was to bring as many voices and as many academics and journalists from around the world and give them this unfiltered information and essentially do with it what you can. Because when we are looking at the reporting of this conflict, it is important that the information that is coming out from this side of it is accurate, because often when we are looking at the Middle East, when we're looking at Hamas versus Israel or Israel versus anyone else in the Middle East, there is definitely some stringency, I think, that many people are facing when it comes to the reporting, making sure that you're speaking as quote-unquote objectively as possible. And often, as has been the narrative here, when you're trying to be objective, when you're talking about the Middle East, unfortunately, it does seem as though the Palestinian side of this argument, according to the people we've been spoken to, is left behind, is minimized, is reduced. And so what the legacy, I believe the organizers are hoping for, is that bit by bit, with each report, with each bit of conversation and information going back out into the world, many people who are listening will be able to make informed decisions about this war in the Middle East, especially from the perspective of Palestine.
All right, then, thank you so much, Adefemi Akinsoya, international correspondent. They're holding it down in Turkey, Istanbul.